Hello developers, writers, and everyone who loves game design.
Welcome to DLC Not Included, our weekly podcast where we discuss game development, the industry, and everything in between.
We're your hosts, Steele
and Teal. Glad you could join us.
All right, we're on Season 2 where we are going over methodologies of game development. We're picking random topics each week and talking about
game development stuff.
Right, like, why you should do game modding or why you should get into the UX.
Yeah, everything that a budding developer should know.
Exactly. So we want to give a huge shout out to anyone listening to us live or anyone listening to us VOD later on. So what topic are we tackling today, Teal?
Today's topic is particle effects.
All right. So quick note, so we don't actually confuse anyone. What's our quick note?
The topic does not go into specific instructions for creating particle effects in any one engine.
Right. This is not a how-to tutorial.
This is not a how-to. We're not telling you how to do it.
Right.
We're just telling you what it is and
different components
so that you can put this in your toolkit.
Right. You need to understand the methodology behind the creation of particle systems. And then when you go into whatever, where it's Effectseer, the Unreal Engine itself with Niagara, Cascade, anything in Unity, et cetera, you'll understand what the components are and why, they work the certain way that they do.
Right.
And how you can use them with whatever they're called in the engine to make your particle effects do what do. But let's start with the very basics.
Okay.
People think of particle effects, they're going to think of sparkles and fireballs, and that's not always accurate. That's
part of a particle effect.
Right, you can create those.
Yeah.
But that's not what a particle effect is. What is a particle effect?
Okay, so in short, they're visual effects created by, you can display, animate, and combine them. All these little things, we call them particles.
Yeah, little things.
Little things, yeah.
That you put together. And we say little things in the sense that it's many different types of things. Because you can have particle effects include like giant sprites of barrels.
Right.
Meshes of barrels on a conveyor belt could technically be a particle system.
That is technically a particle.
Yeah. So
different models. You think of particle effects, you think of lights. Little motes of dust or little sparkles or stuff like that. But again, they can be sprites like barrels.
Yeah.
Or
models.
Leaves.
Yeah,
models.
Leaves. They could be actual just light sources.
Yeah.
Although that would look a little weird to not have something visual with the light source. You could technically have it be light sources. So basically, just about anything can be part of a particle system. That's what they're called, particle systems. And that term, I know I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit, but the term particle system is that simulation of things.
Yeah.
We'll get to a more defined definition later on. But why
let's go into what exactly is let's go into why you have particles.
Yeah, why call
it a particle?
Right. What is a particle? It actually borrows from mathematical scientific terms.
Okay.
Where a particle is a base component of existence, like a light particle, which is a photon, that kind of a thing. So anything that is a particle has a finite lifespan from the point where it starts existing, which is spawn, to the point where it stops existing, which is death.
So I guess the core, the essence of that, what you just said, would be finite lifespan.
Yeah, a small thing that has a finite lifespan that is part of the system. That's a particle. And the reason we're going into such minutia over the term particle is so that you can wrap your mind around when you're creating these particle systems, you're actually creating some hundreds, sometimes thousands of little things that have a finite lifespan that create part of your overall effect, whether it be
So think, for example, your little motes of light. Right. So a particle, a little mote, that tiny little mote comes into existence, it floats for a little bit and then disappears.
Yeah, let's go into a magic rune, a magic circle around your character's feet as he starts to cast a spell. The actual rune that you would draw out in Photoshop rotating around That would be one set of that's a particle.
That's
that would
a particle, yes.
The rays of light that fly around there, and wrap around your character and then fly off, those are particles. The little sparkles that come off of their body, and the concentration of energy little rays around their hands. Those are all different sets of particles, and they all come together to create the particle system that is that particle, that effect.
It's that one effect.
That one effect.
So
why use them, right?
Yeah, why use them?
Yeah. Why use them?
Well, first of all, come on, they add realism.
Yeah.
Realism, visual flair.
Yes. They make your game look pretty.
Yeah.
Things like fire, weather effects, like you mentioned, leaves earlier.
Yeah, leaves, falling leaves.
Yeah.
Hey, blood.
Blood effects.
Blood effects.
Absolutely.
Right.
What's some other types of flair?
Hey, well, we were using the dust.
Dust, like if you go into an attic.
Yeah.
And there's little dust particles
effects,
everywhere. Yeah.
And we were also using the little motes of light, little magic sparkles.
Like if you go into a field at night and you see a bunch of little lightning bugs.
Yes, little lightning bugs
floating around.
Right.
Those could be particles.
Yeah. Mist. Like the mist coming off a lake.
Yes.
That's also particles.
Yes. But you could get really awesome, like the stars in your space warp as you go between planets.
Yeah.
All of those are things you can do to add flair. So you have realism, like you have your fire on your campfire, your rain coming down from your storm clouds, blood splattering out, like you said.
The blood splatters, right.
Or flair. So it adds life, is really the best way to describe it. It adds life to your game.
To the visual of your game, and all that adds to immersion.
Which is all part of the UX. See how we're stringing these all together?
It's all linked.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's go back to that term particle system.
Particle system.
Right. We actually wrote down a definition. So read the definition as written, Teal, so that we can get that out of the way.
The actual particle system is the actual simulation in which a particle effect is generated, usually out of multiple components working over a common lifetime.
How technical. So basically, whenever you're creating a particle system, you're adding a whole bunch of things together that create and influence these many different types of particles.
Absolutely.
To create that effect.
Yeah.
See magic circle earlier. So let's go over those components, because you have to understand the components of particle systems in order to really work with creating them. Now, again,
there's a lot of components.
And we're not going over specifically one engine.
No.
The names of these may change. Each engine handles them differently. This is an approximation. The names themselves may be different in your engine, but the concept of the components
is the same.
Yeah.
So let's go over the first one. We call it the system component.
So every particle engine is going to have something that handles your global properties.
Yeah.
That controls and affects everything. That's sort of your master control. So call them your global component.
That's what
system component.
The system, the system component is very global. Yeah.
Now you're going to have a ton of little things called emitters. Tons of them.
Yeah, the emitters are the things that oversee the number of particles that are created over time.
They're your particle creators. So for everything, like in the spell casting magic starter, the rune's going to have an emitter, the ribbons of energy are going to have an emitter, the things that come out of your body and out of your hands, those are going to have emitters. Your eyes sparkle, those are going to have emitters. So everything that creates a set of different unique types of particles have an emitter.
Yeah.
And there's another component that works with that emitter component.
Yes. In tandem with the emitter is what we call the particle component.
Right. So the emitter is, think of the emitter as the nozzle of the fountain.
Yes.
Think of the particle component as what's coming out of that fountain, that nozzle.
It's what is actually being emitted.
Right. So, for example, an emitter would have properties over what's being created, lifetime, different little things like that make it broken up into smaller components like lifetime, death, decay, etc. While the particle component would be like, I'm going to pull this mesh from your library of assets, or I'm going to pull this little mote of light, this little sprite from your asset list.
Right.
That would be the particle component. You don't want to confuse the two because one is a set of properties, and one is literally pulling something from your asset.
Actual little visual thing.
Your asset library.
Yeah. Okay, now that we're kind of going through this a little bit, like one thing is leading to another.
They're all connected.
They're all connected. So I want to talk about the velocity component because that's going to oversee the direction that your little particles go in and how fast they go.
Right, which everyone who knows anything, if you know some physics, direction plus speed, which is, directional vector plus speed is velocity.
Yeah.
So, is there an acceleration? Which is a different thing that oversees the amount of acceleration. Velocity would be, is there anything that's moving this thing? Is it moving?
Yeah, is it moving?
Without a velocity component, your particle would just fade into existence or blink into existence and then blink out.
Yeah, in the very same spot.
Yeah, it wouldn't move at all. But also understand that there is no angular momentum with the velocity component. It's just it's just movement.
Yeah, all it is the movement
direction over time.
In a particular direction over time.
But what if he needs to do a rotation?
Okay, then you're going to pull in your rotation component.
Yeah.
That's going to oversee
angular momentum.
Okay, you're going to have to explain angular momentum.
Okay, angular momentum is rotation. In other words, spin. Things moving.
Spin.
Could also be like in a vortex. Because you don't want to look. It's the term angular momentum can include rotation around its own axis.
Okay.
Rotation around something else. Revolution. It's just moving in a circle or something.
Okay.
That's rotation. That's angular momentum. So your rotation component does just that.
Okay.
So instead of having velocity, direction and rotation in one component, most particle systems, any competent particle systems, are going to split the two up.
And they should.
Yeah.
They absolutely should split those up.
Right. Now.
You mentioned the next component. You mentioned it before, the force component.
Right. The force component would handle things like that would be things like acceleration, deceleration over time.
Absolutely.
So that'd be something like wind, gravity. If you're shooting a bullet from a gun, it's going to go faster. That kind of thing. Those are, in fact, that's a really good analogy. If a bullet's a particle, the speed of it's going to change as it comes out of the muzzle to as it goes over the lifetime before it hits either its target or the ground, and eventually gravity is going to affect it. So gravity would also be a force. So in this case, you'd have more than one force component on your bullet particle because one would mathematically be representative of the force of the speed of the bullet as it comes out of the muzzle and travels, and the other would be the gravity of whatever on the bullet.
Yeah.
So think about it like that. And you can have you can have multiple components, by the way.
Gravity and friction.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's the word I was looking for. Speaking of which, there's another type of force you can work with.
The external force component.
The external force component is acceleration and deceleration from another particle system.
Yeah.
So if you had, for example, rain coming down and that affected your bullet, that rain would be an external force that your external force component within the bullet's particle system would take into account what that rain is doing to it. You would actually connect the two particle systems together, and you would say that the external force from the rain system is affecting the gravity of the bullet system. Now, what we're talking so far has been things, what we're talking so far has been things that are very well defined, very ordered. There's no randomness.
Right.
But sometimes you want to have a random component. Like, for example, snow flurries is a great example.
That's a good one.
If all of your snowflakes and your snow flurries are all going left, right, as they kind of zigzag to the ground, using whatever force and rotation, it's going to look boring as shit. Reality, nature is not ordered.
Yeah.
Nature's very chaotic. So there's a component that you can use that specifically simulates randomness, and that's
the noise component.
Right. That's going to be randomness to movement, rotation, etc. And it's all based on something called a random seed. A random seed is a impossibly long decimal number that is randomly chosen, that is used to create this simulation of randomness, because computers don't really do true chaos.
No.
Even chaos in a computer is somewhat calculated.
Right.
It is calculated. So think about it that way. When you put in a noise component, you're going to get randomness. And for anything like smoke, flame, rain, snow, etc., anything that looks natural, you're going to want to use an element of a noise component. What are some other components? Well,
you've got, this is one of my favorites, the Subemitter component.
Yes.
Okay. This is the component that oversees the activities from other emitters.
Right. So smaller emitters on top of main emitters.
Main emitters, right.
And what's a good example of that?
Fireworks.
There you go.
Fireworks.
So your main emitter would be the firework traveling up into the sky, woo! And then when it explodes into blossoms, let's say that it explodes into several other small little firework pieces that are going to go out and explode themselves. Those other pieces are going to be your...
That's the subemitter.
Right. And you can stack these really well on different particle systems. So you could have like explosion equals explosion equals explosion, which would be kind of neat. You can also do it in a somewhat linear fashion. Like if something explodes and then that causes something next to it to explode and then something next to it to explode, you could technically create one particle system that drives out multiple effects.
Yes, think about, let's say, a cartoon example, barrels of TNT.
There you go.
So the first barrel explodes, that causes the next barrel to explode, and the next barrel to explode, so boom, 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 boom.
And the reason that you would want to do that, as opposed to just creating, multiple instances of the same type of explosion timed differently, is it's going to be a little easier on system resources because you're just resolving one system to create an effect. And you as a developer, have to decide when you want to go with multiple systems and multiple triggers and setup, and when you want to go with something that cascades. It's a decision you make while you're developing.
Yeah.
But the options are there. Speaking of options, you can also have the option to have each particle or each emitter, et cetera, generate light through the light component. That's illumination that are made by those emitted particles, subemitters, etc. In the aforementioned fireworks, you can have it be that main firework lights up the area green, and then explodes, and those areas light up like blue and red and yellow, depending on the color of the fireworks.
Right.
So it brings in dynamic light sources and brings them in when the spawning occurs, and then kills them when the death occurs.
Exactly.
So it creates light, basically. And most of the really good particle systems are going to require some level of light components.
Yes, absolutely. Because it's realistic in our world.
Right. The next component, I think, sometimes can be a little misleading because it does a lot more than its name, and that's
true.
The trails component.
The trails component.
The trails component creates those partically generated trails like smoke and laser beams.
Yep.
And you don't want to immediately think that all it is like a tracer, like a bullet tracer or something like that. It can be used for so much more. You would use a trails component to create like a cigar smoke floating up from a cigar or a cigarette.
Yeah.
You would use those. You would literally create the smoke trails. You'd add in the noise to have them go all over the place, and it would make it like a little, little smoke effect. Some particle engines in the more advanced 3D engines can actually create smoke trails directly. It's like a little component there where those are all that's very precise when we're talking about trails in general. You would also use trails to make laser beams.
Yes. If you have a modern game, you want to have your laser beams.
Be with trails.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So here's the beautiful part about particles. Particles, by their very nature, go through everything.
They do.
Which is good and bad at the same time. Because it can look really good if you need to have like raindrops going through a slatted, crappy ass wooden roof of a shed. You want to be able to have those raindrops go through. But you don't want to have those raindrops going through your house that's well constructed. That's going to look really, really bad.
Yeah.
So you can give a certain component to your system to simulate IRL physics, and that is
the collision component.
And what the collision component can do, and this is a really good type of component, is it oversees any type of those physical interactions between the particles and other meshes, pretty much everything else.
Right,
blocking
with everything
volumes.
else, right.
And you can determine different things. You can say, based on this component, particles that hit meshes are going to bounce.
Right.
So it's like you could have like hail pellets, and the hail pellets will bounce off of the car mesh.
Right.
So the hail pellets, the hail little pellets come down. When they hit the mesh, the collision component sends them in a different direction,
right,
bouncing naturally. Or you could use the collision component to just kill the particle. Like, for example, if you were having snowflakes come down.
Ah, yes.
They hit the mesh of the car, and the collision component just stops them, just kills it.
Yeah.
So it simulates the snowflake hitting the car and then melting into nothing. Or you could even have, for the more advanced particle systems, you could have it spawn a subemitter and then kill.
There you go,
it kills the particle, spawns a subemitter, and then kills that. And you would use that for creating little splash puddles of raindrops. So you'd have your raindrop particle come down, hit the top of the car, and when it does that, it kills the raindrop particle, creates the subemitter, which is the little splash, and then kills that. And then boom.
You see what we did there?
Fantastic effects with collision components. Cannot overstate enough how good anything that uses physics is in a game engine.
Yeah.
One more, I think. Yeah, we have one more.
The trigger component.
All right, so trigger components can work with that Acme TNT explosion cartoon thing.
Yep.
A trigger component will oversee something in the game that kind of changes the world a bit. Maybe it triggers a scene, maybe it triggers another particle effect. It's some kind of interaction trigger. And what you would use that for is literally what Teal just talked about earlier.
Yeah. So let's say that you had your different barrels of TNT exploding. Okay. You had them set up in a cave.
Right.
Now the rocks start coming down as the cave's starting to collapse.
So
that's the trigger.
Right. So the sequence of TNT exploding is one particle system. But as those particles of fire, flame, explosion pieces hit those rock meshes, it triggers the sequence of the rocks coming down.
Yeah.
So that way you can have really complex stuff that uses very little in the way of programming. It just uses automation of the actual trigger component.
Yeah.
And that is really, really powerful. So most of the stuff we just talked about is native to 3D engines. You're going to use these mostly in 3D engines. The stuff that you're going to have in 2D engines where you're using something like Effectseer to create the effect, you're not going to really use all of those components. I doubt you're going to use a trigger component. I'd like to see someone do that.
Yeah.
But you're going to use pretty much everything else, the lighting components, the sub-emitters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you're using Effectseer properly, you can create some really beautiful stuff.
Absolutely.
So shall we talk about the rules behind particle system? And I say those with air quotes because there's no right way.
Well, there's no one
right way.
One right way. We just call these universal rules. Okay? Because they just apply in general. The first thing you want to consider, we've been talking about all these different components. Yeah. You need to consider the performance.
Oh, yes.
Your game engine performance. Right. What are those minimum requirements for the engine?
Right, because if your computer can't handle the particle system, let me start over. If your game engine and your computer cannot handle the load for the particle system that's there, like Niagara, you're going to want to use something that's either lower key, or you're going to want to evaluate what you're doing with your particle systems.
Yeah.
Particle systems have the ability to really crunch down on your GPU. Now, it's not as bad as lighting or baking lighting. It's not as bad as dynamic lighting. Lighting is the anathema of the GPU.
Yeah.
But a lot of really complex particle systems can bog your system down because it's bringing things into rendering and then unrendering and then rendering some more. So keep in mind which game engine you're using and what's the minimum requirements of that engine and what is the hardware of your system. Now that you've looked at it from a computer level, let's get down to the scenes themselves.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, obviously you're going to have more than one particle effect per scene.
Right.
Okay, that's just realism.
That's reality. A dungeon's going to have multiple torches, braziers, mist coming off the ground, drops dropping from the ceiling. Dust particles. Yeah, you're going to have all of that. So you're going to have to consider how many particle effects you have in your scene. And if you have any type of occlusion or any other type of rendering trick that you can use to keep those particle effects that are like, halfway down the major hallway up in the throne room while you're down in the dungeon, keeping your engine from basically choking.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of modern 3D engines handle that automatically, but you as the developer still have to take that into account. If you have 100 particle systems per visible area, then you need to take into account what the load's going to be on your PC. Now, again, we're approximating, guys, because I don't know what engine you're using. I don't know your PC setup, and I don't know your end user's PC setup.
Yeah.
But it's irresponsible as a developer to not take some of that into account.
Right. And in tandem with that, walking into a scene, you need to take into account what the player can see at any one time.
Right. Best example of that is if you walk into a part of a game where, you're seeing a ton of particle systems and a ton of lighting, suddenly your FPS rate's going to drop. Then you turn around 180 degrees and you look down a dark hallway that has hardly anything and your FPS rate comes right back up. So you want to take into account when you're designing your levels, when you're designing your scenes, is the player looking in an area where FPS is going to tank?
Yeah.
Really important to know.
Take that into account and work with that.
Yes. Optimization.
Yeah. And remember, rule of thumb, the more lights your system has, the harder it's going to hit the GPU. Because light is rough.
Yes, sorry. Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah.
The light is the anathema of GPUs. And that's a good thing because that means that it'll look realistic, but it's a bad thing because it literally eats your GPU for breakfast.
So, learn to do more with less.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's part of your technique as a developer.
Yeah, we're not talking about lighting here, but if you can bake your lighting, it's going to kill you on the back end. But on the front end, it's going to be a lot better with the light maps.
Yes, it will.
Then you get more dynamic lights for your particle systems to play with.
Here's another good rule of thumb. What we talked about, the collision component.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. This cannot be underutilized.
Yeah, and it can't be overstated how important the collision component is.
Yeah.
It is what allows your particle systems to look real.
Because they're interacting with the environment.
Right.
And that is so important for reality.
What I want to see is someone create a torch particle system where the smoke going up when it hits the ceiling pools a bit.
Yeah.
I've never seen that. I know it's possible. Maybe one day I'd like to do that, but I want to see that. I want to see someone use the collision component to make those smoke particles kind of push out in a radius a little bit before decaying, before dying.
Before decay. Yes. Yeah.
I want to see that because that smoke can do that. Smoke can pool if it's thick enough. Maybe an oil lamp.
And if it's close enough, let's see, you're in a low ceiling place and you've got a torch. It's realistic for the smoke to hit that ceiling and then kind of disperse.
Yeah, if it's a thick smoke, like oil based.
Yeah.
And you could use that for like an oil fire, and you could have the smoke pooling at the ceiling to show imminent danger because you're going to suffocate.
Yes, that's a good one.
So you can use that to create environmental storytelling. And the trigger components, by the way, if you're going to use them, test them over multiple scenarios. Don't rely on them always working the way you programmed them the first time.
Yeah.
The moment you put chaos into a system, you're going to want to test it multiple times. So
because chaos.
Chaos. So if you're going to do like the Acme TNT rock collapse scenario, you're going to want to test it multiple ways. If it's a like a little TNT detonator box,
right?
Okay, you want to test the TNT detonator box while things are happening in your scene. Like let's say while people are moving around or bats are moving around, and then while nothing is moving around, if it's going to be a certain area the player walks into, you're going to want to approach it from multiple angles. Just make sure those trigger components aren't tested in the way that you want the player to do it because the player's never going to do what you want them to do.
Yeah. I mean, and have other people test them too for you, because they'll think of different ways to approach the area.
100%, 100%. And a good rule of thumb is this: don't try to do too much. Don't try to add too much. I love particle effects very much so, and I have to pull back when I design something with them because I want to add particle effects to legit everything.
Yeah, and you end up oversaturating your scene, and it's distracting.
Or it kills the GPU. You want to, moderation is the key, or as Teal said, and I love that expression, do more with less.
Yeah. Remember, subtle is best.
Yes.
Ideally, the player shouldn't realize they're looking at a particle.
Yeah, I'm looking at a particle system. No, instead of I'm looking at a particle system, I'm looking at
snow.
It should blend into the background of the player's mind and be part of the experience.
Yeah.
Not something that's flashy and awesome because you know how to work the particle generator of your program. Yeah. You know, don't show off with the subtle things like the snow, the dust, the rain. Let that be part of the background.
That's just part of the background of the scene.
When you want to impress them, have the magic starter with the runes and the ribbons around them. That's when you want to go, look what I can do.
Or fireworks.
Yes. That's when you're showing off. That is when you're showing off. Don't show off with everything. Just show off with the things.
Just some things.
Yeah, just some things. But most importantly, guys, have fun with this.
Yeah, because as a developer, you're also a special effects artist.
Yeah, so embrace that. And then, it kind of goes into the heart of this. We can give you all of these tools, we can give you all this advice, but ultimately, you got to follow that artist's instinct and make what you have as beautiful as possible.
Beautiful, realistic,
fun. Make the player have fun with it.
Yeah.
All right, so now it's time for us to take questions from our live audience.
If you've been watching, remember to use the podcast question feature in our chat.
Now, while we're waiting to see if anyone has any questions, I want to go a little bit into some things that we've used particle systems for.
Yeah, because we have.
In the little 3D demo, little 3D scene we did of the crash site for Rosenhartz?
Yes.
So obviously we used it for a lot of the fire.
The fire was the first one that I really dove into.
Right,
yeah.
But then we also had heavy amounts of smoke that was supposed to simulate the oil of the steam of the boiler.
Yeah.
Because it was an oil-based boiler with wood. It was an oil-based boiler, so it was very black smoke. But then the area where the steam had escaped, it was very white smoke.
Right.
The rain that was on the scene, that itself was particles, little rain particles. And then whenever it hit the hot boiler and stuff, it would have a little subemitter created that would be a little pss of steam. Of steam. And
see, I remember that the programming the steam, we had it decay a lot quicker than the thick black smoke.
Yes. The steam from the boiler decayed quicker. The oil, the black smoke from the oil, that was it smoke? Actually, was it oil or wood? I think it was wood.
I think it was wood. Yeah.
But that smoke decayed longer, was thicker, had a more viscous look to it. Like I wouldn't want to breathe that in.
Right.
And then the little hisses of steam, as the rain hit the hot boiler.
Yeah.
That was like super fast, little tiny bits, just to add flavor. But there were other things that we did. I think we had a little splash effects in the water. We had
splash effects for the puddles.
Yeah, splash. So those would splash out. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun. Okay, we do have a podcast question.
This is a question from KV. Okay. Could you suggest some resources for further learning on the topic?
Yes, we can. Outside of just Googling it on YouTube. First off, decide the engine you want to use.
Yeah.
Figure out the engine you want to use and dive into that one specifically. However, if you want just general resources on particle effects, Udemy has good courses on
I do recommend Udemy.
Yeah, so go to Udemy and go particle effects, and it'll probably be engine specific, but then you'll have someone deep dive. We've talked maybe 30, 40 minutes.
Yeah.
People can go into particle systems and talk for hours.
Yeah.
The best tutorials you're going to see are going to be for the Unreal Engine, for Cascade, which is the earlier version, the earlier particle creator, and Niagara, which is the later one.
Right.
Those really go depth into the methodology of how particles work. Also, KV, decide what you want to create first, and then reverse engineer it. So that's how I would tackle learning and practicing particle effect creation.
That's it, yeah.
Because you're going to be kind of relearning what you've learned every time you create a new system for a while until you understand the methodology of that engine or that program.
Yeah, that was very succinct.
Very good question.
Yeah, very good question.
And we have another one.
Okay, this one is from Burke.
Okay.
As you went with the example of do more with less, can you think of any study examples? Also, regarding the check your audience's setups, remember that almost every PC gamer has Steam and has submitted the Steam PC survey at least once.
Let's talk about the second one first. That is very true. If you have if your users use Steam, which they more than likely do, yes. So you can check that. You can kind of go on the survey. You can see some information on common setups.
Yep.
You can kind of get an idea of, hey, here's my PC users. This is the most common information, the most common hardware information submitted by them to the survey. So now I know what is the most common GPU, CPU, RAM, etc., etc.
Right.
And then you can plan around that. That's absolutely true. You want to use that. Now let's talk about do more with less. So a study example, I'm going to have to create something off the top of my head, Burke, because I can't think of anything that in a game I've played recently. I'm sure they use it. But a good example would be using a dungeon sequence.
There we go.
A dungeon scene, a dungeon hallway with torches and braziers.
Yeah.
Okay. So what you could do for the torches, if the torches are movable, is have those particular particle systems have the illumination, the light component.
You want the light component.
Because those are dynamic, because you can grab a torch and walk around with it. But let's then say that your braziers are never going to move.
Yeah.
Don't have your braziers flame system create light. Build those light sources into your scene with the exact same, illumination, color, temperature, just change the attenuation of the radius so it looks like it's coming from a brazier and not a torch, and then bake those in.
Yeah.
Bake them in as a static with, on your light map. The effect's going to look the same, but the torches are going to be movable.
Yes.
And are going to hit the GPU during runtime, while the braziers, which are static, only hit the GPU while you're rendering the light map.
Right.
So that would be it, is plan how you use your different sources depending on whether or not they're going to be picked up by the PC, picked up by the character, not picked up by the character, whether they can be moved, not moved. Look at the logic of your level design and go, what's stationary?
Yeah.
Bake it in the background. Bake that light map. Use them light maps.
Use those light maps.
Those light maps are going to beat up your GPU like it's taking its lunch money while you're rendering. But they're not going to do much, if anything, during runtime.
And that's the key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if we have any others. I got to drink this water real quick. My mouth is dry. The weather over here in Houston was really cool for a while, and now it's spiking up to hot again. So Steele went from being chilly to sweaty, and his mouth is dry.
Yeah.
Pardon me. I do like to see when someone uses particle systems uniquely. Yeah. So all of you who are out there listening to this podcast, if you have access to, one of the 3D engines or to FXSeer, why don't you create something interesting and unique, something that's outside of a fireball or a rainstorm, and send it over to us.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, if we can see things that you all can create in your particle systems, we can show them during our Wednesday forums. So, hey, consider this to be homework from the podcast.
Here we go.
To affect our streams on Wednesdays.
Yeah.
Show us what you got so that we can show the world.
So we can educate everybody else.
On unique things. And here we could even make a little quote-unquote contest out of it. Let's see if you guys can create something that stumps us on how you made it.
Aha!
I think I might have just birthed new content.
I think you did.
Can you stump Steele and Teal? I would love to see that. Do we have any other questions?
No.
Okay. We want to thank each and every one of you for being a part of this. You guys You guys constantly are giving us great feedback on ways we can improve. You know, we've kind of turned the energy up a little bit, but not too much.
Not too much.
We're kind of going and talking together, going back and forth, but we're not talking over each other too much. It's good. It's good. We are giving you guys, you know, we love you guys, I should say. We love you guys. Okay. So if you're watching us live, thank you so much for being a part of our live audience and sending those questions. If you're listening to us on VOD, thank you so much. Every time you listen to us on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, et cetera, it just drives us up on the algorithm.
Right.
So thank you, each and every one of you. We love you guys. We really do.
Yeah, we really enjoy doing this for you.
Exactly. So join us next time for DLC Not Included, and remember,
anyone can give you the key, but you have to go through the door.